So welcome to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with marketplace founders and leaders as guests every Tuesday for our group chats. This is episode 10, and I'm excited to welcome Li Jin, who's formerly product at Shopkick, and I think most might know her from investing in consumer marketplaces after at Andreessen Horowitz. She's a thought leader, has recently shared some incredible posts like her thesis on the passion economy, and I couldn't be more excited to have her join us today. So with that said, a warm welcome, Li, and although you're internet famous, maybe start by sharing a little bit more about your background for those that might not know you.
Thank you. Um, so yeah, aside from being semi-famous on Twitter, I recently wrapped up 4 years at Andreessen Horowitz, where I was investing on the consumer team, looking at all sorts of consumer marketplace businesses, mostly, but really broadly, anything that had network effects was interesting to us. So we were very focused on marketplace investing, but also very interested in social networks, professional networks, any sort of multi-sided platform that would get stronger and more defensible as it scaled was really in our wheelhouse. So during my time there, I worked on, I think, 16 of our investments, and that includes marketplaces like Hip Camp, the camping marketplace, Snack Pass, which is a college food ordering and pickup marketplace, Cadre, which is a commercial real estate marketplace. What else? Lime, which is the scooter company, if you would consider that potentially a quasi marketplace. It definitely has like a two-sided dynamic. A bunch of other investments during my time there, and am now angel investing on my own independently in marketplaces and everything consumer related. And yeah, as Mike said previously, was had a consumer background, but on the operating side rather than the investing side. So used to be a PM, managing a team of engineers at a company called Shopkick, which was in the offline loyalty and reward space. So we were working with nationwide retailers like Macy's and Best Buy and helping them to drive foot traffic into their physical retail stores.
Nice. Thanks for sharing more about that. That's kind of news, I guess, for some as far as investing on your own now. So congrats on that. Are there any recent kind of marketplaces maybe that you can share that you've invested in and participating in now?
Yeah. So one of my angel investments is a marketplace called Vori, Vori. I think the URL is just vori.com. It's a B2B marketplace that is connecting CPG companies and distributors to grocery stores for more efficient ordering. So traditionally, the grocery store ordering workflow consisted of pen and paper, like writing down how many units of whatever you needed to purchase and like faxing it to the actual distributor or the brand. And Vori is creating a more tech-enabled version of that.
Nice. And then what stage are they at, out of curiosity?
They're a seed stage company.
I
They
see.
went through YC in the winter this year.
Awesome. So let's speak maybe a little bit more about the evolution of marketplaces, maybe, because I know you've shared quite a bit on that. If we can kind of start maybe talking about that.
Sure. Yeah, so I wrote a piece like a couple of years ago with my colleague Andrew Chen from a16z about the evolution of marketplaces. So you can look that up on the a16z website. I think it's called What's Next for Marketplaces. And in it, we have this really cool chart and like description of how marketplaces have evolved on the internet over the past couple of decades, and specifically how they evolved from like a very surface level horizontal model exemplified by Craigslist all the way through to now more managed marketplaces that really go deeper in terms of providing value add to either the supply or the demand side. And so we trace all the intermediate steps of different marketplace models, including, after Craigslist, there were lots of upstarts trying to peel off different categories of Craigslist and to create various verticalized versions that would better enhance the experience around purchasing or transacting for a specific category of items. So, for instance, like Airbnb for short-term accommodations, or like Udemy for education, etc. You can all think of those as like verticalized versions of Craigslist that go deeper and offer very vertical specific features. And then you had on-demand marketplaces, which were all about honing in on a specific service and making it super easy to discover service providers that could offer that service on an on-demand basis. So it was all about trying to drive towards liquidity and making as many matches as possible and making sure that like the convenience was there for the end consumer, where the model could really be summarized as like press a button, get something, whether that was a service or a product. So the marketplaces had to have a tremendous amount of supply and demand in order to drive towards that liquidity, and that often meant abstracting away a lot of details about the individual workers. And then most recently, I think the latest iteration of marketplaces has been towards a more managed marketplace model. And these are marketplaces that provide more of the heavy lifting in order to aid in facilitating liquidity and facilitating trust. So this model is perhaps best exemplified by companies like, for instance, there was a company called Beepy a few years ago that was a used car marketplace, but the marketplace itself did like all of the vetting and like really extensive checking of quality of each of the cars, and would price it for you and ensure quality and handle all of the delivery, etc. Honor is also a managed marketplace in the like home healthcare vertical. There's a lot of other marketplaces that I would consider to be a managed marketplace model now, especially as like the lower hanging fruit opportunities get picked off, and what remains are verticals where the customer needs greater trust, and there's like greater stakes involved in the transaction.
That's great. So what would you say are some of those verticals maybe?
Anything that is high stakes and high trust and high dollar value, I would consider to be a good candidate for a managed marketplace. So that includes things like healthcare, like anything that involves a really high dollar value purchase, like real estate or used cars or designer goods. Like StockX would be a managed marketplace because they do all of the authentication and verification. Like any sort of vertical where you can't expect the supply and demand to just come together and establish trust on their own very easily would be a good candidate.
Nice. Yeah, I'm actually a big user of StockX myself, so.
Nice.
Yeah. So I have a question on that. I mean, as far as like from consumers that are using the marketplaces where trust is important, and from like a managed side, whether it be for like verification of luxury goods, do you believe that that'll just be kind of like maybe a new kind of consumer expectation?
In terms of consumers expecting that the marketplace does verification?
Correct. Yeah.
I don't think consumers expect it for every vertical. I think consumers do expect that if something is listed as being a brand and being authentic, like they expect the platform to take on some of the work in authenticating that.
Yeah.
Like I think the days of buyer beware and like you don't know what you're getting into when you purchase something, I feel like consumers have a lower tolerance for that now.
Yeah. Cool. And then, so from there, I did want to kind of get into talking about maybe, services, marketplaces, and the individual.
Yeah, sure. So basically, I think like one of the biggest remaining opportunities in marketplaces is probably um, enabling a lot of service delivery to happen online. So I think another way of looking at the evolution of marketplaces beyond how I just described in terms of the different marketplace paradigms is also in terms of the various things that are being transacted in the marketplace. So, in the early days of marketplaces, it was really about facilitating either the transfer of a physical good or some sort of service offline. Like on Craigslist, you know, it was either about transacting a lower cost item or the service delivery was being delivered offline and people had to meet up in person in order to do it. So you would find a tutor on Craigslist, but then arrange a time offline to actually meet in person. Or to find a gardener, you would find them on Craigslist, but then like the service delivery would actually happen in person. I think moving forward, an opportunity that I see and that is being totally accelerated by COVID is how do you actually deliver some of these services entirely online? And we've already seen this in the past few years with education, where rather than just using a marketplace for discovery, but then the actual experience of the service happens offline, we're now seeing that experience move online entirely. So the marketplace is what I would call like end to end or online first, where it's not just about discovering someone online and then moving offline. It's about the entire end-to-end experience now happening online. And that is, that's a model that is exemplified by something like Coursera or Udemy. But now it's reaching into other verticals, especially now given COVID and the fact that we can't meet up with service providers offline. It means that a lot of services that had been being consumed offline and delivered offline now need to be delivered entirely online. And I think the onus is on like founders to determine what kind of like how do they actually translate those offline services to an online first model. um, like there's probably lots of service verticals where um, you can do that translation relatively simply. Like fitness is a category where like people used to meet up with personal trainers in person and go to boutique fitness classes in person. And now that can be delivered entirely online virtually. There's other services that I think are harder to deliver online, like anything involving like personal care, grooming, maybe healthcare, some healthcare verticals, like anything where there's like people are literally in contact with you physically, cutting your hair or whatever. Like, how do you deliver that online? But I think this online translation of services is going to happen more and more, especially as people realize that there's added convenience to this kind of model.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're all kind of trying to think through as a group as founders of marketplaces for sure. So, have you do you maybe know of any examples of marketplaces that have brought the services and delivery end to end? I think Udemy is a good example, but do you know of any others maybe?
I think like Outschool and VIP Kid have both done this really well. VIP Kid being the language learning marketplace for English, connecting native speakers of English, oftentimes in the US, with school-aged children in China who are trying to learn English, but learn it from a native speaker. And so VIP Kid, all of the sessions happen entirely online on their platform. And so you never have to actually meet your tutor in person.
Oh, cool. Have to check that out. So, I think maybe kind of getting into talking about the individual a little bit more as they kind of part of marketplaces as the service providers. I was kind of curious as far as like talking about the passion economy and then the individual as a creator. Do you see that as like a progression kind of from being a service provider on marketplaces or?
I think the passion economy it's very broad and it encompasses all sorts of business models, not just marketplaces. So there are some marketplaces that I would consider falling into the passion economy, um, and others that I would consider falling into the gig economy. But as like an umbrella term, it encompasses like an entire ecosystem. And I think even calling it an economy sort of suggests that of there's a lot of stuff that goes into it beyond just marketplaces. So the passion economy, just to define it at a high level for everyone, is basically an ecosystem of people being able to pursue what they love doing as their profession and being able to lean into their creativity and their individuality in order to make an income rather than doing really commoditized work. And so the example that I often like to mention is the contrast between something like Uber versus something like Twitch. In the Uber model, the workers are entirely commoditized. As a rider, you don't care the specific individual that you're going to get, who's going to be driving you. And in fact, the entire product experience is designed in such a way that you can't even choose the specific driver that you're going to get matched with. The platform does it for you. And I think an even further indication of commoditization of the driver is that they're working on the self-driving car effort because the driver can be completely automated, like they're completely fungible with a car that just drives itself. Versus in the passion economy model, the worker is critically important to that transaction and not fungible, and consumers are acknowledging that they're purchasing something expressly with the desire to engage and interact with that worker. So in the Twitch example, a consumer is not just subscribing to anyone who plays Fortnite or whatever. They're subscribing to a particular individual streamer that they feel a connection and affinity to. And I think that that differentiation is critical to this distinction between what is considered passion economy versus gig economy. Another example would be Substack, where as a writer, you can publish any newsletter about anything that you want, and everyone's newsletters is very different. And as a reader, you're not at all indifferent between which newsletter you subscribe to. Like you're subscribing to someone and you're building loyalty with a person. So I'm really interested in new platforms that are enabling people to monetize their individuality, and new platforms that, rather than telling the worker exactly the steps they need to take in order to make a living, are actually just giving them a set of tools such that they can determine for themselves how they would like to build a business. And marketplaces falls within that. There's also SaaS tools that fall into that thesis, creator tools, fintech platforms, education platforms, anything that's in the realm of supporting people as they pursue making a living in this way would be within what I consider the passion economy.
Yeah, thanks for defining that a little bit more clearly. So I actually have a question because I think a lot of us are familiar with Substack, and it's come up quite a few times in conversation with the group. Would you consider that a marketplace?
I think they are somewhere in the middle of a marketplace versus a SaaS platform. I think today, most of the readership is driven to newsletters by the writer themselves promoting it. So people are promoting their newsletters on Twitter or through word of mouth or whatever. And readers are coming to the newsletters that way, in which case I consider it more to be a SaaS platform where the writers are taking on the work of building their own readership. Like Substack, if you go on substack.com, it's actually pretty difficult to find a newsletter about XYZ topic. Like you probably go to specific Substack newsletter instead because you discover it elsewhere. So I don't really think of it as a full marketplace today.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I know, for instance, like I subscribe to Lenny's newsletter, who's in the group, and it's like I know that I'm subscribing to him kind of versus just the overall Substack. Cool. So how do you see as far as the future of some of these like say for instance we'll just use Substack as a tool that allows creators obviously to monetize. How do you see the future of that maybe kind of play into with the marketplaces?
Sorry, say more.
So I'm asking some, I guess, with some context that like a lot of us in the group maybe are kind of thinking about, our marketplaces that have the individual kind of, creator kind of part of it. How do we potentially look at these, tools like SaaS tools for creators? And how do we kind of balance maybe being, going into having a SaaS tool part of our marketplace or not?
I see. Yeah. I would start with what the supply side and demand side needs. I mean, that's just true of building any sort of great business. You always want to start with your constituents and stakeholders and see what it is that they need. So in the Substack case, there was like this dual need of among writers, they needed a sustainable revenue source. And they needed to be able to make a living, which they weren't really able to do just by publishing on a generic blogging platform. It was really difficult for them to cobble together the tools to create a subscription program for their readers. And then on the reader side, there was this need of wanting to have a more curated information diet and wanting to have that curation come from an individual writer that they respected and trusted. And so Substack, like they saw that these writers had already built affinity with a following. And so like starting with a SaaS tool made sense in that case because discovery wasn't as high priority of a need. Whereas in other verticals, I think discovery might be more of a need and people don't even know what they want to actually consume in the first place.
Awesome. That makes sense. Cool. So we actually have a few questions. Is it cool if we just jump right into a few questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Let's see. Levi, you want to jump on? I know you messaged me and had a question.
Yeah, I did. Hey, Lee, Levi here. Thanks for having us. For giving us a chance to hear about just I think how you've sort of framed marketplaces. And, I think it's easy to say that we're huge fans of yours, and congrats on joining. Everything. Is it everything market? The newsletter that kind of has everyone sort of
the bundle.
Bundled together. Yeah, the bundle. Yeah.
Yes.
So I've got a question, I think, centered around bundling versus unbundling, and this is pointed towards I think direct to consumer and retail specifically. So I think if we looked at retail as kind of like this first iteration of bundling, right, where you had Nordstrom's or you had Neiman Marcus, you had these stores that effectively would bundle hundreds and not thousands of brands together, and then categorize them kind of uniquely. Versus I think in today's market where you had sort of Shopify and how it effectively became the tool that helped unbundle that, right? And gave power to brands effectively to market themselves, to have technology that would enable that. So I think looking at both those lenses and looking at the current environment where now you have those direct to consumer digitally native brands that as they're growing and looking to scale, they start tapping into they start thinking like, hey, well, we've got to go omni-channel now, right? Where, we've hit this threshold of CAC or of ad spend or Google spend. But in a post-COVID world where perhaps that channel now, they're starting to think about like, hey, does it make sense for us to go into brick and mortar, or does it make sense for us to go into these other channels? How you would sort of look at that environment?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I would push back on your characterization of that as even bundling in the first place. Bundle, the definition of a bundle is like when you purchase something and it includes more than one thing. Whereas I think Nordstrom, what you're actually honing in on is that it provides a place for discovery of new brands, but you're not necessarily needing to purchase more than one thing. I think the distinction that you drew is that these retailers like Nordstrom or like Amazon, they facilitate discovery and they own the customer relationship, where you're deciding to go to Nordstrom or to Amazon.com as the first step in your shopping journey, and the brand is sort of secondary to that, versus Shopify sort of flips that dynamic and realizes that there are some retailers and some brands where you really want to go to their website as a destination, and you already have developed a relationship with that brand to where you don't need someone else intermediating that relationship. That is the major distinction that I would draw.
Perfect. Thanks, Li.
Cool. And Tom messaged me too. I think he has a question, wants to come on.
Hey there. Two questions. One is, what have you found has been the best tools for measuring supplier or host satisfaction, other than NPS? And second question, which is, in marketplaces that have matured and you see, individual suppliers as well as power sellers, as eBay used to call them, how do you see balancing those two, or what trends have you seen in balancing those two?
Yeah. So your first question about how to measure supply side satisfaction. I don't know if there's a better way than NPS, but I think the metric that most investors and probably most entrepreneurs care about is retention. Does the supply side continue to stay with the platform? And that is sort of an indicator of satisfaction. Like, are they getting value from the platform? And if they're getting repeated and consistent value, then you would expect retention to be high. To your second question, sorry, can you say the question again?
That's okay. I was just saying, as a marketplace matures, so I run product at Turo, now we have a lot of power sellers, as eBay used to call them, people who have lots of 50, 100 cars on the platform, but we also have individual, people who are just renting their car out occasionally. What trends have you seen in terms of organizations balancing the needs, which are quite different?
Yeah, I think this is like a perennial challenge for any marketplace. I think the important thing is that any supplier, any like supply side user still feels like they can sign up for the platform and be successful. Like that they still have a chance to succeed. And I don't know specifically what the feature set, or onboarding process looks like to facilitate that, but I think it has to do with specific features like, how you surface the supply side even, like how you rank them in the search algorithm when results come up. Like, are they on an equal footing, or is it overly weighted towards the power sellers? Yeah, I agree that I think it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. But I also think that like having even power sellers emerge on a platform is a really positive indicator that the marketplace is working. Like, if people are able to make their entire living from the marketplace, I think that's actually a really positive signal for investors.
Thanks so much.
That's a great question. Cool. So Sabrina, did you want to come on with that? So I think Sabrina's, I'll just ask it for her. She put it in the chat. So she asked if, do you think that B2B marketplaces can generate the same type of network effects as B2C marketplaces?
Yes. I, yeah, I do think so. I mean, I don't see why not.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure the exact kind of context if it was like for her specific marketplace or not. But cool. Let's got a few more kind of questions. Did you have any? By the way, Lee, did you have any anything that you wanted to specifically kind of mention to us? You know, as marketplace founders.
That's an interesting question. I would just like to say that I think marketplaces are, I mean, beyond the reason why we love them at a16z, which is that they had great network effects and made awesome defensible businesses. I think like another reason why marketplaces are so awesome is that they really democratize opportunity. Like they actually represent this, you know, platform, this level playing field on which anyone can sign up and get access to customers and earn a living. Like I think that's really powerful and is an underappreciated, under-acknowledged facet of what even a marketplace is.
Yeah, well, it's a great point. All right, we have all right, Will, do you want to come on, Will, and ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Hi, Lee. So I'm a long time user of Upwork and to a lesser extent Fiverr. So I look at Upwork and Fiverr and TopTal some, and I see those three as kind of the leading professional services marketplaces. There are others, of course, but I see those three come up the most, and they each kind of occupy, you know, high, middle, and low level, low price point. But they're all three, TopTal a little bit less, but Upwork and Fiverr are very broad. You know, everything from a developer to a logo designer to a whatever. And none has really like tailored the experience, the user experience to one of those niches of professional services that are on offer on the platform. And so I've wondered if you think there might be an opportunity with like an Upwork to unbundle, disaggregate it in the same way, to use the old Craigslist analogy, where like an Upwork just to hire logo designers or an Upwork just to hire X, Y, or Z thing, since Upwork is a blunt instrument, and I use it to hire all variety of different service providers, and often find, you know, bump up against limitations because whatever I'm hiring, Upwork isn't super tailored to, the Upwork user experience isn't super tailored to. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I would just say I don't think necessarily that the entire trend or powerful force in the universe is always towards unbundling. Like I think things don't always need to be unbundled, and like if you go back and look at all of the startups that were trying to unbundle Craigslist, at a certain point, like some services actually made sense to bundle together. Like for instance, the home services category, people don't actually need like the opportunity to build an even more verticalized version where it's a separate marketplace to find a roofer and like a gardener and a home cleaner and like XYZ things that you need around the house. Like it's actually probably good to bundle that all together, because each one of those is so low frequency on its own and kind of a niche market on its own. And like when people think of needing something around the house, like they can more easily recall something that is like meta for like a home services marketplace rather than something super narrow in particular.
Yeah.
I think like for the question of Upwork and Fiverr, I haven't actually used those platforms as an actual consumer myself, so I'm not sure on like the breadth of services offered, but I would really consider how often are people even transacting one of those like sub verticals on their own, how frequently does it happen? Like, could the business even stand on its own if it were just focused on logo design or slide deck design, etc.? Or can it actually benefit from putting all of those things into the same place? My guess is actually the latter, because if you're a customer and you want to get a logo design, chances are you probably want your website designed or some other thing designed. And instead of having 10 different marketplaces that all need to acquire the same consumers and the same suppliers, they can all be placed into one marketplace where the economics are much more favorable.
Yeah, that's great. Yep. Thank you.
It's a great question. I think Adrian, do you want to jump on?
Sure. Hey Lee, thanks for all the insight you've been sharing so far. I'm Adrian at Prism FM. We're a financial SaaS tool for professional concert organizers, and we're moving towards becoming a market network. So my question for you was, given your experience with managed marketplaces, especially as an investor, I'd be curious to hear if you've come across any exciting new companies that are looking to provide kind of like infrastructure for managed marketplaces. Have you seen anything like that? Anything exciting there?
That's interesting. I actually haven't. And not only have I not really seen infrastructure for managed marketplaces, I also don't really see much in terms of infrastructure for marketplaces in general. Like, I think there's actually a lot that's generalizable across different marketplace businesses that could be provided, as a service, as a platform. But I don't really see many founders building for that, or maybe I just haven't really been looking. Like, it boggles my mind that every marketplace founder needs to rebuild everything from scratch.
Totally. What does anything stand out as the most common things that are kind of repeatable from what you've seen?
I mean, just all of the components of a marketplace, like the supply side sign-up process, the demand side sign-up process, the direct messaging functionality between the two sides, the ability to list services that are being offered or products, and sorting and searching for them. I guess the one example of like infrastructure for managed marketplaces, which goes much broader than just marketplaces and can be used by anyone, would be like Checker, the background checking company, which is used by a lot of managed marketplace businesses to verify someone's background.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Dan, do you wanna come on?
Sure. This is really kind of a follow-up to what you just said. Given your feelings about the similarities that so many marketplace founders have to build things, what are your feelings about marketplaces that are no code or low code, like ShareTribe Flex?
I'm actually not very familiar with them. Can you say more about what they do?
Mike, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I guess Dan builds has a marketplace that's built on ShareTribe Flex, which is in essence they've kind of provided the backend infrastructure for marketplaces, for peer-to-peer marketplaces. So it just makes it really easy for someone to kind of basically take their marketplace idea to a live product very quickly, and then it can kind of integrate with other third-party services or build out like more advanced functionality as the marketplace begins to kind of validate and scale.
Oh, that is really cool. I have to look into this. I hadn't seen them before.
And just to follow up, my marketplace is a live appearance marketplace for professional authors to do live appearances with readers, with their readership.
I love that. That's really awesome. I saw another business the other day, sort of similar to this, called Book Club. I think it's called
I've heard of that. Yeah. Yeah, I've been reading your stuff lately, and it's clear we share a lot of, similar ideas.
Yeah. Do you think that you'll stay on the no-code platform, or do you anticipate moving off of it one day?
I mean, that's an answer that I can't answer right now. It depends what features I require that I'm stuck with and I can't develop. And as the marketplace matures, a lot of truth is being revealed about how to build supply and demand and how to build the marketplace outside the marketplace itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I need to be able to flex to accommodate where the growth is. And being on a no-code marketplace has, by definition, limitations. So while it's very easy, it makes it easier to get started. You know, ultimately, when you're in very nuanced areas of developing the marketplace, you may have limitations. But fortunately, Flex does have the ability to build outside of it and supplement or customize.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. I think probably the reason why, like, I haven't seen much in the way of infrastructure for marketplace companies is because every marketplace is so specific and looking for very specific features, especially as you go beyond just the Craigslist listings model and deeper into the marketplace being managed in some way, doing verification of products or services in some way. I think it all becomes very specific to that particular marketplace.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Oh, cool. Levi, did you want to jump back on?
Yep. Haley, so one of the things that you mentioned early on was kind of these tools that help creators monetize. And so I think, looking at sort of Substack or looking at, some of the newer tools that are developed as the creator economy continues to sort of expand, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on from early days, right? From that 0 to 1, what are some of the early markers that you would look for, these tools or these platforms that enable folks to monetize, a community or an audience that would really, I think, stand out as, that would be standout effectively.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to generalize between them because there's so much variation among all of them. I think that if it's addressing a vertical of creators where they already have an audience and a following that has really high affinity for them, and just enabling them to monetize that in some way, I think that's a good indicator to me that the tool will probably be successful in being able to facilitate that type of monetization. I think the leading indicator for why Substack would be successful, besides the fact that the product is, super easy to use as a writer and just definitely the best platform if you're trying to start a paid newsletter. I think beyond that, the vertical that they were going after is broadly what I would consider to be a knowledge influencer, someone whose knowledge and expertise everyone always wants to get deeper access to. And you could sort of see the latent demand for this on Twitter, where there's Twitter influencers who every time they share something, people just go crazy and want to read more. And they're always asking can you write a book? You should write a blog post about this. That to me was sort of the leading indicator that there was demand for something like Substack, which could more easily enable non-producers to become producers. And I think going vertical by vertical and considering all of the types of knowledge and skills that people have, I think the opportunities lie in the areas where there's probably a lot of latent demand for something that just no tool has made it easier for people to productize and put out into the world.
Got it. As a follow-up to that, just to be a little selfish here. So I think one of the opportunities we see, for a specific vertical of creators is, I think, those in the lifestyle space. So those that kind of highlight and function as discovery element for, you know, different brands that they represent. And so I think, you know, so what we're building effectively is an ability for those fans or that community to purchase those products directly from them, rather than to leverage, you know, kind of like the affiliate redirect of sending folks, you know, to you know, Allbirds, or to sending them to Warby Park, or sending them to Everlane to then purchase that item. So it'd be being able to purchase directly from that creator, and then building kind of, you know, technology that would enable that to happen seamlessly. And so I think in you know, using kind of that example of like, you know, a retailer using it, I'd be curious to get your thoughts of like, you know, here's a group that, you know, like you said, that has sort of this very feverish sort of community, like folks that are super engaged, like YouTubers and such, like, where you have people that comment and do that. And so with that, you know, I'd be like, what do you think would be some of the early indicators that would say like, hey, this is actually something that you should continue, you know, sort of building features or tools or yeah, for.
So I think for this particular vertical that you're talking about, the other factor to consider is that the competitive landscape is dominated by a few large social platforms where they are moving in the direction of enabling commerce and purchasing direct from creators. So I think it's widely acknowledged that these types of lifestyle influencers do generate a lot of purchase intent and probably lead their followers to buy lots of different things. But I think the fact that they put the content out there on these large horizontal social networks, it sort of means that you are susceptible to being cut out of the transaction should they decide to just implement this as a feature.
Okay, thanks, Lee.
Cool. So I actually had Marina message me. She's on a train right now, so that's why she couldn't get the connection earlier. But she asked, what's the hardest, let's see, actually really quick, the exact question. Sorry. Okay, so she was asking, how do you recognize the hardest side to solve the chicken and the egg in the early stages?
I think it's usually harder to get the demand side on rather than the supply side. I think it's usually like the supply side is the side that is making money and earning something, and they can just be, you can acquire the supply just by guaranteeing some amount of earnings. Whereas the demand side will not come unless you're actually offering something of value to them. Yeah, this is why I see most marketplaces starting with like aggregating the supply by either paying a guarantee or, yeah, usually paying a guarantee or something. But then demand is the harder thing to actually scale up economically.
Yeah. Yeah, actually on that point, I had a question myself. Do you see that as common, like subsidizing the supply side with some form of guarantee? Is that something that you're, you know, seeing right now? That's common.
I don't know how common it is. I mean, it's definitely common among people who can raise a lot of, I think, venture capital. But like for supply, it's relatively low risk to sign on to a new marketplace, especially if there's the promise of increased earnings. Like they don't have to shell out any money. It takes very minimal time, especially if like the business model is, you know, percentage of revenue or some sort of success fee. Like if the only cost to them is based on success, then usually suppliers are willing to try a new platform if it means like potentially selling more or earning more. Whereas for the demand side, it's harder to really appeal to them unless the marketplace is actually valuable.
Got it. Yeah, that's a great point. Cool. Hey, Kenny, did you want to come on?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Hey, Lee. Good to see you today. I actually met you, I think it was in December in San Francisco after one of your talks. I ran across town And then I tweeted and called you the Michael Jordan of the passion economy.
Oh, that's so funny. I remember this so much. Yeah, back when we still did these kinds of events in person.
Pre-COVID. So I mentioned then, but I'm building a platform in the mentoring space. It's called Mentor Pass, and it's built off the model of Class Pass, where you pay a subscription and you get a certain number of credits to use across all of your different mentors. And so we build cross-functional teams of mentors for early stage startup founders. And I'd like to ask your overall thoughts on this space. It does seem to be getting increasingly crowded, not necessarily mentoring specifically, but what I'll call the overall kind of knowledge labor marketplace or expert economy marketplace. And I just wanted to ask you where you see this maybe 3-5 years from now. If you see a lot of successful companies, do you think it's kind of a winner take all? I was having a conversation with an investor from 500 startups, and he was pushing me more towards raising lots of money because he thinks it could be a winner take all market. And if we don't, raise this much, we may get left behind. So I just wanted to hear, how do you think this will play out with the expert economy and knowledge marketplaces?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that the space is getting a lot more crowded than before. That being said, I don't know if it's actually winner take all, because my sense is that people have very specific preferences when it comes to coaching and mentorship. And once they find a mentor that they really like, tend to just stick with that person over a long time. So if you become the best mentorship marketplace for a specific sub-vertical, I think given people's very distinct preferences, there's potentially like a niche to be carved off, because it's not like people are just looking for any mentor and the biggest marketplace is going to be the place that they turn to. I think, yeah, like user preferences are really diverse in this market, and people might be looking for like an exec coach versus like someone who can help with them with fundraising versus someone who can help freelancers, etc. Like the needs and experiences of these coaches is so different that I would push back on it being winner take all.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Then I think we have time for like one more question. So Kevin, did you want to come on?
Hey Lee, nice meeting you. Thanks for doing this here. You've been super helpful, and I've read. I think we're all like fanboys and fangirls here of you and everything you've done. So, I think there's a rising trend with education with ISA-based businesses like Lambda School and FlockJ. I'm just curious to know what your thoughts on those businesses are and would you consider them marketplaces as well?
Yeah. I think that those businesses are really interesting because they are essentially approaching a market where there's this supply and demand imbalance. And instead of just trying to let the market be and say, like, let's match the existing supply with the demand, even though there's such an imbalance, they're actually going out and creating new supply themselves in the form of additional software engineers in the case of Lambda School, or additional salespeople in the case of FlockJ. And if you look at like the broader labor stats in America, there's many of these professions where there is a vast gap between supply and demand. In other words, there's an undersupply of qualified workers for these jobs. And there, I think the opportunity is to actually create new supply where there was no supply before. Right. And I think that's what Lambda School and FlockJ are doing. Would I consider them to be marketplaces? If they are taking that supply that they've created and matching it to demand, then yes, I would consider them to be a marketplace. But obviously it's not a classical type of marketplace because they're creating the supply side. It's sort of like this hybrid model of school plus marketplace on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like their model would be better served if they were to take a cut from the from the recruiter? Like, say that if they educate, like for Lambda School, for example, if someone finishes like a full stack and they hire them at employer hires them at full stack, then that employer would pay the Lambda School on for the student completing a full stack curriculum. I mean, sorry, a front end curriculum. And then if they finish the back end, then they like milestones based, and that way it's also less risky for the because I think there's like a lot of bad press and maybe like on the ISA, and seeing if it's like a viable, so like if it's like predatory in a way as well, seeing the government can crack down on it. So I'm just curious to know if you think like the ISA is also like a good financial instrument to tie these students to, and whether that's like fair to them or not, depending on like the press that these schools, I mean, FlockJ and Lambda School are getting.
Mm-hmm. So I haven't dug into these businesses for a while, so I don't know the details, but my understanding based on when I did do research into them is that the ISA is a choice. Like no student is being forced to sign the ISA. They're usually given a choice of like, do you want to pay up front
Mm-hmm.
or do you want to sign up for this ISA?
Mm-hmm.
And so like, and the ISAs are usually capped at some amount. So it's not like if you go out and make $1 million, you would have to still linearly scale up the amount that you pay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that different models correspond to different types of user needs.
Mm-hmm.
And the ISA model appeals to a constituency that might be short on liquidity, but like feel that they have little, perhaps like opportunity cost of time. And so they're willing to give this a shot and see what happens at the end. Like there's more upside than downside. For someone who is really confident that they're going to make a ton of money, like they would probably prefer upfront tuition.
Right.
Like I think the ISA has, like, to your question of like whether I'm a fan of the ISA, like I think every sort of payment model has its target audience. And there's no like one size fits all best way to pay for education.
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously the ISA is really aligned to people who want to maximize earnings.
Mm-hmm.
Like the institution also wants you to maximize your earnings because like their revenue will be a percentage of your earnings. If you're then going out and trying to attract students who have a more holistic sense of they're not only optimizing for earnings, but they're trying to optimize for life happiness or fulfillment or like learning, then perhaps the ISA is not the best model. But I think it definitely has a time and place.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because you know, it's you don't need to target all of the education for these schools. To just, you know, target like a certain subset, and they'll get your you know, a profitable business that way.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thanks, Kevin. Well, wow, Lee, this was great. So we're kind of running short on time, so we'll wrap it up on this. And this is amazing. Though, so I really appreciate once again taking time to chat with us all. I know we're all definitely thankful for your time and sharing your you know, your knowledge and insights with us. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of leave us with?
Sign up for my newsletter, lee.substack.com, if you haven't already. And I'm doing a weekly talk show now with Nathan Bashez from the Everything Bundle, where we interview founders and operators in the passion economy who are building businesses that let people monetize their passions. Usually I just announce it on Twitter the week before, so stay tuned for this week. It'll be on Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern.